We're so excited today to welcome Katrina van Osch Saxon for our next presentation. So, welcome, Katrina. Katrina is the coordinator of the Forestry Technician Program at Fleming College and teaches across the Urban Forestry, Forestry, and Arboricultural programs. Right. All right, so we're so excited to welcome Katrina for our next session with her presentation, A Little Planning Goes a Long Way, Keys to Successful Tree Planting, Establishment, and Growth. Katrina is the coordinator of the Forestry Technician Program at Fleming College and teaches across the urban forestry, forestry, and arboriculture programs. She holds a BSc from the University of Guelph, is a certified arborist, and takes an ecosystem approach to teaching, helping students build connections with trees, each other, and the environment around them. Katrina is also focused on building an inclusive workforce, raising awareness about career opportunities for underrepresented people, and has facilitated several events to showcase different career paths for women interested in pursuing a career in the green industry. So I'll hand it over to you, Katrina. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Lily and Rachel and Reforest London for inviting me to speak today. And thank you all for coming to my talk. Hopefully you can take some tidbits away to help you install trees and help them thrive in the future. As Lily said, my name is Katrina, and as mentioned, I'm a professor at Fleming College. More importantly, I am the daughter of an immigrant who came to this land from Holland in 1954. I would like to recognize and acknowledge that I am presenting on Mississauga lands and the traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. I am able to live, teach, and learn here today because of the Indigenous people who cared for and continue to be the stewards of this land. Please take a moment to reflect on where you're tuning in from and consider what steps you can take towards truth and reconciliation. I will learn more about the Mississaugas of the Great Anishinaabe Nation as I continue on my learning journey towards truth and reconciliation, and will include stories of connection with my students as they build relationships with the land and their communities. And so I thought today's topic was really tied in really well as far as stewardship is concerned, because so much work goes into growing urban trees, especially the ones that we plant out into those really tough urban sites. And if we don't do it properly, those trees won't survive, and they're living beings. And so we have to do our best to try and do a great job from planning all the way until post-establishment. And so today I thought it would be a good idea and a great opportunity to reiterate some really awesome resources and lessons that I've learned and put together a little bit of a recipe that is not something that I created, but that has worked and is effective in installing trees in the landscape, and decisions and considerations that you can all use to help to promote a resilient urban forest. So I am going to focus on urban tree planting, installation, establishment, and hopefully successful urban trees. So this is an image actually that I acquired quite recently in a group from Facebook. Somebody posted, it's a tree propagation group, and someone posted this amazing yet not picture of a root ball completely exposed, showing kind of what our starting situation is with urban trees. And I've seen this hundreds of times, but I thought it was just a really good visual to drive home the importance of why we have to follow every step of the recipe in order to achieve success. And it's like any baking recipe. If you miss a step, so if you miss the sugar in your recipe, it doesn't taste the same. And if you miss a critical step in the urban tree planting process, then we're not setting up these already stressed trees for success in the landscape. And so I really just want to highlight today some of the important resources. I attended the ISA conference a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and it seemed like this is a common thread. I know a couple of topics that I'm going to include here today were already touched upon, but I do think redundancy and reminders are critical in the work that we do as urban tree managers. because if we don't do it and if we don't spread the word, I'm not sure who is going to, or the folks that don't know as much as we do. And so what I'm going to try and do is disseminate all of the information that I have put together over the years to train students here at Fleming, hopefully well in tree planting and establishment, and hopefully they've kind of taken those lessons and applied them in the work that they do. But I think this picture really says it all. We know that up to 90% of an urban tree's root mass is removed in the balled and burlap method. Of course, if you're planting container stock, it's a different situation. But this is stressful for the tree. And so what we do after this moment really matters, but what we do before this moment matters as well. In the planning phase. And so let's start at the very beginning and talk about kind of where this all begins and why we're all here together today. Planting does really start with the people. And this is a picture of me and one of my classes. This was actually last year, where after we talk a lot in class about all of the different things that you need to consider for tree planting, we actually, boots on the ground, get out and very slowly go through all of the different steps of planting. And I think education is so important. And I know there are so many great resources out there. And sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so I really am here today just to try and make the process a little bit easier for folks or people who are trying to build a tree planting program, who have existing tree planting programs that they just want to make better so that they can look at the trees that they planted in years past and feel good about the job that they did and know that they set the trees out kind of in the best situation that they possibly could, have taken care of them post-establishment, and basically can leave them, it's probably not free to grow is not a good term because a lot of our urban trees still need to be managed, but in a situation where that sets them up for the most success. And honestly, I feel that it comes from situations like this where we take a ton of time exposing students to all of the potential resources that they can use in the future to ask questions, to glean information from, so that they can do a good job. And to date now, I think we've probably trained over 1,000 students on proper tree planting techniques and post-establishment care. And I think that is key. But the mystery a little bit for me is that I am still able to go out onto the landscape and see examples, I call them urban tree infractions, where things weren't done correctly, simple steps were missed that are clear that tree is not going to be either successful or thrive in the area or the site that it was installed. And so I am just going to go through some of the, I would call them critical resources available to all of us, and show you how I use them, how you can use them, and then just some considerations moving forward wherever you are, especially if you're involved with planting urban trees, that you can maybe add to your toolkit for tree planting and installation. I am going to just say right now, I am going to try and click between tabs in Google, and that requires me to stop sharing. So it might be a bit clunky here as I kind of learn the ropes and see if this works, but I think there's going to be good value in it as I try and do this. So hopefully many of you on the call, if not all of you, are at least aware of this document. And if not, and you're new to this, then welcome to the Ontario Landscape Tree Planting Guide. We have come a really long way in tree planting. When I first started in the industry, there were really great resources out there. I used the ISA certification study guide as a good guide to help students. But this fully comprehensive tree planting guide came out in 2019, or was revamped in 2019. And so many professionals in industry took part in developing this reference. It's long, but it is comprehensive and it leaves no stone unturned. And that is key. So it is a step-by-step, it is the best recipe that I have seen out there for start to finish tree planting and establishment. It's unreal. And I think what the challenge might be for a lot of people is just where to start and actually diving into the content, because there is a lot. But the beauty of there being so much is that any piece of information or detail that you are missing or that you're not sure of has clickable live links to help you learn more about a particular topic. And so today I'm going to focus on soils, because I know that's something that not everyone has a strength in. Not all of us, and including myself, are soil scientists, but you don't need to be able to plant successful urban trees. You just need to know the basics. And so that's what this guide helps you do. And Benjamin Franklin once said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I really do think that if we all commit to following this guide and kind of use it as a standard for tree planting, that we could collectively make a really big difference in our urban forests and their resiliency. It's not easy for these trees to survive and thrive to size at maturity, where they really start to provide those benefits that we tout. Really, they don't start to do that until they're mature. And so if we can't get these trees to maturity, then they're not providing all of those benefits that we need, that are essential part of our everyday lives, especially in the urban centers across Ontario and Canada. So I just want to, this is where the train might go off the tracks here for a minute, but I do just want to highlight so I'm going to show you the appendix, not the appendix, what is this called? Table of contents, and just talk through each piece quickly. And then I'm actually going to try and go into the document to give you a little bit of a tour of the document. And if this is redundant for any of you, I think that's fine, actually, because I think there is so much information in here that even a professional in this industry might glean or learn something or have a suggestion. And that's the nice part about this document. They welcome feedback and comments to continue to make it a better and more helpful document. So as you can see, chapter 1 starts, we're not even really thinking tree at this time. We're thinking about what the site looks like, all the way down until chapter 7, around after the tree is in the ground, post-installation practices and thoughts, and really everything in between. And if that information isn't enough for you, there are also field sheets, which I think are the cream of the crop. So this is the piece that I was particularly interested in as an instructor in this realm, is how students and practitioners can use these field sheets to make sure they've checked all the boxes, literally checked all the boxes. So how about we take a tour, trying to be brave here and kind of go where no woman has gone before. Let's see what happens. Okay. Share screen, Chrome tab. Let's see. Oh, that was, can someone confirm that I am on the actual?
You're good. Yeah, we can see the tree landscape planting guide.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's have a quick tour. So this is the guide, available free online it's a downloadable document, so you can save it or access it when you're in the field if you're unsure. But let's imagine that you got to this stage. So you did your environmental site assessment, and you got to the piece where it was the soil assessment, and you're not particularly a soils expert, but you really want to know to be able to select your tree species, because you know that whole saying, right tree, right site. It is absolutely 100% true. You must have that. We're like matchmakers in the landscape. We need to match the tree with the site. But once you've got that piece done and you need to determine or complete your soil assessment, if you don't know anything about it, you can click to all about soil assessment and to learn really about the things that you need to consider. And it is pretty straightforward stuff. I think the average person can read this document and get enough of a understanding to complete some pretty simple and straightforward tests to determine what kind of soil or soils, especially in urban areas, that you might have on site. And that starts with soil texture and drainage test. More about that in a minute. There's our soil texture triangle. You should test for compaction. Many of our soils in urban landscapes are compacted, but some are not. And there's a simple test that you can do with something like a metal coat hanger. And so you don't need fancy tools for the most part in a lot of these tests, just to give a simple assessment about what the soil is like. And then assess how much soil organic matter, as well as testing for pH. And so one thing about pH that I do want to just rest on here for a moment, because there are some really great labs across Ontario with live clickable links in this document if you don't know where to go. And I'll show you in a minute. But if you don't know the pH of the soil, it is a critical piece of information that you should know. There are some really simple pH tests at Canadian Tire. You can buy some on Amazon. They're cheap, and they'll just give you a general idea. They're definitely not as good as a lab analysis, which is ultimately the best. But in a lot of cases, especially if you're planting a large site with multiple tree species, if that's the intention, it might not be reasonable to have every location on that site tested for pH. So there are a couple of really simple workarounds that I think folks should know about. So let's have a peek at one of the field sheets. Let's do soil again, because just from my experience, it's the realm that students maybe not struggle with, but know the least about, but that does impact tree growth significantly, arguably one of the most important. So this is what the soil assessment field sheet looks like. So you can see all the materials that are recommended or required for your soil assessment, how to conduct a drainage test, pretty simple test to see how water moves through and away from the soil on the site, critical in determining tree species, conducting a soil compaction test, collecting soils for a laboratory analysis. And here's the little link. If you don't know where to send your soil analysis, it gives you a list of different locations that might be close to you that you can use for a soil assessment. And one of the biggest skills that I really try and have students leave with is how to hand texture soil. It does require quite a bit of practice, but once you get good at it, and by good at it, I mean, I just want you to be able to determine how much sand, silt, and clay, the composition that is in that soil. I don't care about percentages. I really just want to know, is there sand, is there silt, is there clay, and relatively how much? And as you do this more and more, you get really good at determining. You may not be able to classify the soil, precisely, but you'll get a good understanding of the relationship between that soil texture that you just determined and what tree species could function well and establish and thrive in that type of soil. So soil texture is one of those ones that I really encourage folks to work on. And actually, the ISA also has a really simple soil texture key. I accessed it on Forestry Images, actually, but it's probably in one of their manuals. It is one of the easiest soil texture keys for simple soil texturing that I've come across. However, if you can't find that, if you click on this live link here, it will take you to a document. I think it was the University of Kentucky that walks you step by step through hand texturing a soil. So all to say, these documents really leave nothing to the imagination as far as how we should be assessing the soil for the site. And I think that's really important, and something that most folks, I'm just going out on a limb here, no pun intended, most folks aren't experts at. The other piece is organic matter and determining how much organic matter you have on site. I know a lot of work has been done, and at the ISA conference, Vineland Research was talking about soil extensively, and organic matter really is critical. And so being able to assess how much organic matter is in the soil or available to soil microbes and to your tree is really important. Soil volume is also key. So how much soil is available for your tree roots? Especially if you're planting in a constricted site, then you're going to need to assess the size of tree that is going to be able to fit in there. But we'll talk about this in a minute. So anyways, I just really wanted to take you on a quick tour of the document. Of course, it is not as comprehensive as I would like. But hang on, Chrome tab. Let's get moving on here. I don't want to run out of time. But I just wanted to give you a little sightseeing tour of the document to show you all of the different parts that are available. And so we will continue on, and I'm really just going to break down each chapter little by little to help explain or highlight some of the key things that we need to be assessing before we get to planting. And so I'm going to go through chapters 1 through 7. This is like Katrina's version of this guide, something I've been doing forever, but now have that resource to back up what I'm doing, or I can use that resource and send it off with students as they head out into industry to support their efforts in urban tree planting. And so, of course, it starts with site evaluation, not just what you can observe, kind of where this person's boots are, but I always choose a picture like this because I think drainage and topography play a really big role in the success of the species that we pick. So that's a little bit soils, which is the next slide. But looking at hardiness zones, and right now we're in a time of change, and I know the USDA just changed some of their, or updated some of their hardiness zones, and so we are in a little bit of a flux, but it's still, you know, we still all know relatively what hardiness zone we're in, and so we have to be sure that we're picking a tree species that's going to be hardy to the area that we're planting in. If you're doing any kind of research or kind of pushing those boundaries, then that's great too. But just understanding where your tree is coming from, where it's suited to grow is really important. But also incompatibilities, so identifying overhead and underground utilities that might pose a challenge, how big that tree is going to grow into the future, whether it's a shade tolerant species or not. And I think something that's often overlooked when we look at shade tolerance is buildings, and that buildings cast arguably more shade in some cases than other trees or plants. And so making sure that we're assessing all of these things, incompatibility with other vegetation in the landscape, and just being aware of what the site is like, whether it's got extreme exposure, so high winds, drying winds, strong winds, versus a more protected site that might be more of a microclimate. So doing a thorough site assessment is also really important before you even get to selecting your tree species, because all of these things are slowly going to narrow, in many cases, the tree species that we select to go into the landscape of that particular site. So we might only be left with a handful of tree species because there are all of these other limitations. And so instead of maybe being able to plant our most beloved or favorite tree species, we might have to make a, we might just have to say, yeah, okay, my fave tree wasn't going to go, it can't go in this site because it just won't thrive. And so we're going to have to go with species B or C. And that's okay, because the ultimate goal is to grow fully mature, healthy trees for those benefits that we talk about all the time. So I've already chatted a lot about soil already, so I'm not going to harp on this too much. But so often urban trees are planted into the landscape without having any idea of what lies beneath, what the soil is like. So soil texture, pH, whether it's compacted. And it's really hard. I've experienced this firsthand a lot. It is really hard to install trees into the landscape when you know that that tree species that is delivered is not suited for what you're experiencing as you begin to dig the hole. And so it's so much better to do a quick site visit, shove a shovel into the ground, have a peek, do a quick texture. You can do a pH test with those little pH kits that you can buy online or from Canadian Tire right on the spot. So if you have a little bit of water and a couple of minutes, you can do a pH test. But that will provide you with the starting point, a really good starting point for tree selection along with your site assessment. And so all of these pieces are like pieces of a puzzle that will fit together ultimately to provide a good, hopefully a suitable growing site for the species that you select. And I'm going to show you just one of the resources for species selection here in a minute that I think is helpful in picking which tree species you want to plant. And so this is it here. And again, this information is located in the tree planting guide that I highlight. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, here we go. So here's the Eastern Canada tree species selector. There's, I think, a Central Canada tree species selector, but I chose this one just for demonstration purposes. So imagine that one of the first slides there with the boots in the puddle, that's where we are selecting a tree for. And so we've done our site assessment, and I'm going to walk through the things that I think I know based on the assessment that I've done. And so the first thing it asks you to do, and of course, this is going to be an expedited tour, but under each of these little question marks, it provides more information for you around, answering that question to the best of your ability. What a caveat on this website does tell you that the more information that you put in here, you may not generate a result at all, or your results are going to be fewer. So I am just going to put a couple of these in here. I really want to plant this tree in a residential area. I'm going to say that my soil quality meets Vineland's recommendations, which is high soil organic matter. It would just mean that either it exists on site or I've amended this soil great organic matter. So I'm going to say yes. My hardiness zone is 5. So we're going to pretend that we're planting these up here in Lindsay. And I want to plant a large tree. I like big trees, although I won't be able to enjoy the shade that it casts in, 50, 70 years, but that's okay. Are we going to do drainage tolerance? No, I think we're just going to... I don't know. I think we're just going to pick. So I've tested my pH, and I've indicated my pH test said that I have a low soil pH. So I want it to be between 5 and 7. So let's see what this generates for me. Let's see what tree species. So I actually have my heart set on a species of Quercus, which we all know right now is a little bit under the gun because of oak wilt, but I still want this tree species, but I need to find out more. Now I really need to learn more about that tree species and whether it's going to be a good selection for the site that I've picked. And so this website gives you all of the information. It tells me that this tree is native, which is something that I really want. I'd like to plant some more native trees. This isn't an argument native or not, but I do like to plant native tree species when possible. However, I mentioned oak wilt, and so I think we should learn a little bit more about the insects and diseases that our tree could potentially be prone to, especially if it is a stress tree. So if we pick the wrong site or plant this tree in a site where it is not going to thrive, then it is even more prone to insect pressure as well as disease. And so it tells me that it is a general host for a range of insect pests, but on the flip side of that, it also hosts a lot of insects that provide food sources to our wildlife. So it's kind of finding that balance. So I know that some of the other considerations, because as an arborist, I've actually had to do a lot of work on trees that oak trees that dropped acorns that were troublesome for landowners. And so acorns can be a litter issue in some years, which is true. And I know that, and can develop chlorosis in alkaline soils. But I know that because I have done a pH test, I know that I have acidic soils. So I feel like I've checked all my boxes. And so I just wanted to highlight again this really cool resource. So if you're thinking about tree selection, that it is available there to you through the guide. It is a clickable link, pretty easy to to navigate to that gives you a really great resource that you can select your tree species or use the tree species selector. Not all of the tree species on the list are ones that are great to grow here in Lindsay, but then it just allows you to do a little bit more sleuthing for your tree selection. Another one of the resources, there's actually two that I wanted to highlight. I've been doing this for so long now that I just call them Pub 840 and Pub 841. But one really excellent resource is the Crop Protection Guide for Nursery and Landscape Plants. This one was published in 2021 or updated in 2021, and it has a ton of helpful information when it comes to managing pests and diseases of landscape plants, including trees. And so although you've selected your trees for the desirable attributes, so for me, I know that oak trees are a great host for lepidopteran insects especially. And so they really add to the ecosystem value. And of course, they're just strong and beautiful trees. And so that's why I chose Quercus. And for the function in the landscape, they're proven performers. But we have to look at that other piece around post-establishment management. If you select a tree species that has a lot of insect pests or disease that could potentially reduce that plant's lifespan in the landscape, then I think it's something that you have to be aware of, because not many folks think about how much it's going to cost as far as management is concerned into the future. And so that should be a consideration. And every situation is different, of course. But if you decide to go ahead with this tree species, so for us, it's going to be pin oak. This book here really, or this resource, it's free, available online, is really great because it allows you to kind of research almost every pest and disease. I don't know that this has been updated for oak wilt yet, but it is organized according to insects and diseases in the reference material of Quercus. So it lumps all of that genus together, but still is really great. So I've just taken a quick screenshot here just as an example. It just shows a couple of different species of insects. So aphids, fall cankerworm, spring cankerworm, and golden oak scale. Lists all of the products used to manage it. And in the final column there, far off on the right, different management options, monitoring options, etc. So I use this tool often in combination with tree selection, especially if I'm not as familiar with the species, or if people aren't. I say, like, if you're not familiar before you select the tree species, check this resource to see what you're going to be up against as far as pest and disease. So you need to have all these in your toolkit ready to go at all times so that you know that you're making the best selection. And I know you might be thinking, or maybe you're thinking right now, like, darn, this is taking a lot of time. This is going to take me a lot of time. It does to start. But as you get better, you will learn, just like I did, and it will become second nature. So once you become familiar with the tree species, you'll know what insects and disease, or the species attributes, like whether they have weak unions and they are not going to be able to withstand strong winds, or whatever the case may be. You get to grow those relationships. Oh, this is so punny. But you get to develop those relationships and learn about how all of these things interact, where it becomes kind of second nature as you're making these decisions moving forward. So good. We've done our site assessment. We've looked at our soil. We've gone through the species selection. We know the tree species that we want. The next step is to figure out where you can procure those trees. So what nurseries have those trees available? And not all nurseries are open to the public. So if you're planting at more of a commercial scale, then you might end up in a situation like in this picture, or you might be going to a garden center, depending on where you're tuning into today. But the next step is, I call it picking a winner, where you're evaluating the trees in the nursery for the quality of stock that they supply. And it's good to ask questions from the nursery about when the trees were dug or how long they've been dug and how they've been handled. And sometimes that information is just not available or people don't want to tell you. And that's just the nature of the beast of tree planting. But once you establish those relationships, if you've purchased a couple of, trees or 100 trees, that relationship will continue to develop and will work in your benefit. And one cool thing that I don't know if it's common knowledge or that everybody knows, but there is a Canadian nursery stock standard. And this quote I thought was really important to kind of highlight. All nursery stock shall be healthy, viable, undamaged, and substantially free from all pests, including harmful weeds, insects, and diseases. Between digging and delivery, roots shall not be exposed to drying winds, sun, or frost. And so this standard is a commitment between growers actually in the transferring of stock at a higher level, but it also helps to ensure that we as consumers or people who are going to be planting these trees, we know that they have been cared for at the highest level or at the highest standard before they come to us. And so there are some things that as practitioners that we should be aware of and be thinking about when we select our planting stock. And I have seen some beautiful nursery stock and have had the luxury actually of planting some of it. But I've also seen some nursery stock that doesn't quite make the cut and have planted that nursery stock. And over the years have been able to, through pruning, been able to train those trees into a healthy specimen. But I can guarantee that the success of those trees tied back to a site and soil assessment and matching the species with the site. So I thought this was really important to kind of bring to the forefront around the standards, the Canadian nursery standards, and the stock that we should be starting with, and that we all kind of have a bar that is set for planting stock or nursery stock. So yeah, we have standards, just ensuring that nursery stock is of the highest quality. I think one other thing that folks often overlook, especially because we don't show a lot of examples of planting container stock here at the college. We typically just do balled and burlap because I think it just is one of the hardest times to plant. We do talk about planting container stock, but as a practitioner, I think it's good to be aware of the different types of planting stock available, the different sizes of trees. And this document, again, available free online, has so much great information about how trees are grown, the different sizes, the different stock. You learn the lingo of the grower world or the nursery world. And I think it just helps to give you a better foundation when you are procuring your stock or figuring out where you're going to get your stock from. And over time, you're going to compare and contrast and learn kind of what stock works best for you. And I personally, depending on the location or situation, I don't think there's anything wrong, and probably you don't either, with planting smaller container stock over balled and burlap. You definitely, in some cases, get more bang for your buck. It's much easier to manage. You can control girdling roots. I'll show you a picture here in a minute, or you can help to manage girdling roots. And but knowing that ahead of time, I think is really helpful for folks in our industry and pushing the boundaries as far as what we can kind of get away with in locations, so smaller stock, in locations that might be lower use or more protected, where those trees are going to have ample time to grow a little bit bigger before they're exposed to, I'm not going to say vandalism, but higher use. So I think this was a really good point to highlight. The other point, because I'm watching time here and I just need to speed her up. The other really important part is site prep. Making sure that when it comes time to plant, you're actually ready to plant. And step one is Ontario One Call. So making sure that you've got locates on hand, actually on hand, when the shovel or equipment hits the soil, because we have to be sure that we aren't going to have incompatibility problems with underground utilities. So you need to have some lead time to make sure you get those locates ready. Is your soil ready? So if you've identified a soil problem, compacted soil, poor soil texture, so maybe something like high clay, or what would be another problem? pH can sometimes be difficult to change. So I would say choose your tree around the pH of the soil instead of trying to work to change the pH, because it can be tricky. Making sure that your soil is ready. And so that's thinking about things like bioamendments. So compost, and good compost, quality compost is critical. Composted wood chips, I also recommend, especially for the mulch aspect. You can top dress with fresh wood chips, but I always suggest a good bed of composted wood chips first. And then I don't care if the top dress is fresh wood chips. People sometimes just like the look. It looks cleaner. If you want to include biochar, which just provides basically a little house for soil microbes, moisture retention, things like that, mycorrhizal additions, or any other kind of biofertilizer. So any kind of planted greens or greens to top dress the area. I know that a lot of nurseries now do a lot of biofertilizing within the rows of trees to help return nitrogen to the soil. So there's lots of really cool options there to prepare your site for planting. And then once you're ready to roll, it's good to make sure that you are planting healthy stock. So this actually starts in the nursery with an examination of the tree. So my previous picture there with Jess and the red oak in the balled and burlap, just assessing from the top down or the bottom up, making sure that the stem is secure in the root ball. So we don't recommend ever using the stem of the tree as a handle, but just giving it a gentle wiggle. If it has a lot of play in the root ball, then that means it's not secure for whatever reason. So sometimes it can be because the soil at the nurseries is a lot of sand, and so those root balls aren't really secure. But a good tree from the nursery should be secure in the root ball. And again, just checking to see how long that tree has been dug. Check the stem for any damage, any disease, any cankers, any sign of insect, and then the same with the shoots. So making sure that if the tree is still dormant, that you're checking for flush buds or buds in general, any kind of cracked bark, if there's leaves or needles, if there's any kind of insect damage or feeding or disease. You want to know that ahead of time. And we know that a lot of our pests and pathogens now are transferred through nursery stock, and you do not want to be that person who pulls nursery stock into a new location where it has insect or pest problems. And so these are all things that we should be considering. And then this picture here on the right is a great picture to show what happens when you plant a tree that had early girdling roots. This looks like it was container stock because it's like the perfect circle that wasn't fixed. And so we do teach students a lot, although we don't do a lot of container planting, how to correct girdling roots at the stage where it's actually feasible and possible. And students always ask me, is it bad to cut the roots? And I say, and I would recommend them to look at the second picture of this presentation of that giant, that was a Quercus as well, but with those sheared roots. And the beauty of correcting girdling roots in a container stock is you're cutting such a small amount of roots, and you're actually using secateurs, which have been disinfected, and making a clean cut. So my argument for fixing girdling roots from potted stock is a very strong one. So making sure that the tree that is going into the ground, you've prepped properly. The next piece is planting. And if you want a visual of what a properly planted tree should look like in a diagram format, I'm going to refer you back to the guide. I'm trying to remember now all of the examples. They have deciduous tree planted at grade, so well-drained soil, deciduous tree planted above grade, so poorly drained soil. They have a coniferous tree planted at grade, well-drained soil, coniferous tree planted above grade, poorly drained soil. All of the specifications were required for all of those. As well, there was one other one. Oh, bare root, a bare root example. So it does leave nothing to the imagination as far as hole depth and width, because I have seen a lot of holes dug for trees that are the bare minimum. Basically, it's like trying to jump into a pair of really tight jeans with the root ball. It's really difficult to plant those kind of trees. Whereas digging a very wide yet tapered hole and according to the root flare. And my first bullet is really one that we should take a lot of time to discuss, although I don't have that here today. So I'm just going to try and do the Coles Notes version. When trees are dug, especially balled and burlap from the nursery, they many times, not all, have a buried root flare. And so in those diagrams, they are expecting that you are going to expose the root flare. And this is always like a treasure hunt, especially when we're trying to show students, because I'm trying to explain this is what you're looking for. And they're digging and digging and then constantly, is this it? Is this, are we getting there? Because in some cases, it can be up to 30 centimeters below, like it is a lot below the soil line. And so that is critical in establishing how deep you're going to make your hole. And in situations where the hole is dug before the root flare is exposed, sometimes we're in a situation where we have to add soil back into the planting hole, which is less than ideal because that soil settles. And when that soil settles, that means then your root flare could potentially drop below grade. And we know that's not great, especially if it's in poorly drained soil. So exposing that root flare is a critical part of the planting process. Once the tree goes in the ground, and I'm going to show you some, these pictures are all courtesy of this is a group of our students hard at work. For these students, it takes about an hour to properly dig and plant the tree and backfill. But it's important because they go through all of the steps. And so here is one of my colleagues. This is Cole. After the tree has gone in the ground, but before staking, so we always like to water our trees in, but as important as putting the tree in the ground is, so is the aftercare. And so things like staking, the only time I would suggest not staking a tree is if it is well protected, very small stalk, or you're never going to come back to it. And if that's the case, then you can just use wooden stakes and hopefully they'll break down. But these big trees that have had most of their root mass removed are like sails when the leaves come on. And so staking is a critical part of the process. And again, the details are in the planting details in the guide. Mulching. I can't stress this enough. For most of us that have any kind of forestry operation, it's free or cheap. Of course, it should be composted for at least 6 months. That's because you want it to be right away being able to leach nutrients down into the tree roots so that you don't have to worry about fertilization. This picture is not fertilization. We're just using the fertilizer unit to actually water the trees in because it's easier for us. And then you want to make sure that you are monitoring your tree for success, really. You want to make sure it's happy where it is. You want to make sure that it's getting the appropriate amount of water, etc. And pruning is one of those things that we debate back and forth. And I am a believer in pruning the tree especially deadwood before the tree is in place, but only the minimal amount of pruning at the time of planting. And you can start a pruning cycle or a pruning program 3 to 5 years after the tree has become established. It's already under enough stress. So by pruning that tree at the time of planting, you're just adding to the amount of stress that it's under, especially if it's summertime planting. So we know that spring and summer are key times for planting, but especially if it's in the summertime and we're experiencing drought, any kind of added stress to that poor little tree is unnecessary. The only other time we would consider pruning is if you're never going to get back to that tree and there's some kind of structural pruning, like maybe there's a double leader or something that you could snip off at the time. But for the most part, I think we are able to get back to these trees to reassess and evaluate whether pruning is required, because we know structural pruning is critical to the success of urban trees, especially as far as safety is concerned. So how do we ensure success? All of this information is really great, but I think one of the key pieces, and I've seen this, I'm going to use York Region as an example because we field trip there, but I know there's other municipalities here in Ontario, across Canada, and even the globe that do a really great job in evaluating planting and the steps that are taken, and put a lot of time and effort into, you know, site evaluation, soil evaluation, species selection, and then post evaluation to make sure that all of those puzzle pieces snap together perfectly to hopefully provide the best growing site for those trees. And I think like it has been done. York Region does it. I know they have a great number of resources, but I even think at a smaller municipal level, and even in a small business, like a private business, all of these things could be incorporated just at a different scale. But these resources help to provide that consistency or that standard that people need to kind of meet or exceed, hopefully, in planting. And so I've just included some recommendations to include the planting detail in the contracts that might go out if it's municipal, or if you're paying somebody to plant a tree, and then having or ensuring some kind of accountability that could be through internal inspection, external inspection, so that those trees can then be released from contract, so that you know that they've gone in the ground properly, that they've had all of the, you know, care up to that point that they needed, and that they can then be released to grow and hopefully thrive in the urban landscape. And I think, you know, that is a really important part. So in this picture here, I just wanted to highlight, I was talking before about exposing the root flare. And let's see if I can get a drawing tool here. Oh no, I don't want the pointer. Let's get the pen. Okay, so you can see here, there is the root flare at grade here. That is where the soil line was on that tree. And so this great group of fellas, they were getting frustrated because they kept calling me over and saying, is this good? I'm like, no, you have to go deeper. And so there is one really good example of what needs to happen when you are preparing the hole. And actually this day, sometimes depending on the contract that we're working for, because these students every year, we plant trees for the local municipality. So it's part of their curriculum, but we have a lot of great examples and opportunities for them to install trees. So this is in a park, and so they actually had to hand dig these holes. Sometimes the holes are machine dug, which poses a challenge because sometimes they're a little bit too deep. But in this case, they were able to expose the root flare, and it saved them a lot of labor and time because they didn't have to dig a hole as deep as what the root ball started out looking like. So that's why they're all smiling. They were all very happy about that. I think that's all I want to say there. And we're missing, of course, the wood chips because part of the instructor inspection process is ensuring that the tree is at grade before they apply the mulch or the wood chips to the tree and stake it. So, and we usually stake it before the mulch goes down. So anyways, this is a job well done. They got 5 stars for this tree. And so this is my final slide, just to reiterate that in this industry, with a focus in land stewardship, we are trying to grow relationships with trees and with people, and connecting all of that together. You cannot have one without the other. And I think if we connect, communicate, and educate, we will do a better job of growing urban trees. And I'm hoping that at one point I won't be able to find any urban tree infractions in the landscape moving forward. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. You've taken away some good pieces or tidbits of information that you can apply kind of to the situation that you're growing in. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for all your knowledge and sharing of resources that are going to help move things forward for all of us that are involved in planting trees within our communities. We do have a few questions for you, so we'll take the next few moments to be able to answer some of those. So first off, do you recommend removing grass first in a large planting area for multiple trees? What ways work best to remove said grass?
That is a really good question. And actually, that thought came in my head and left as I was talking about that second last slide. So you know what? Do you mind if I share my screen again, Shaquille?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Let me just, because this is going to be a better visual. Whoops. And actually, full credit here goes to Cole Vanderschaft, one of my colleagues, who showed us how to do this. So when you're trying to plant a tree, you definitely want to remove the sod or any competitive vegetation in the area if possible. And so what we show the students how to do, so Cole pounds a stake where you want the tree to go, takes a 1 meter cord with a spray can, and you can kind of see it right here on the right side. See this kind of circle here? We spray paint.
Katrina, your screen isn't shared yet.
Oh, dang. Hang on. I got so excited. Okay, now are we good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, so this is the circle that is created with the spray paint. You can see kind of that white outline. And then all we do is use shovels. There are cool sod lifting tools. If you have those, you can use them, but we really just use a shovel or a piece of equipment. So if you have any kind of like a mini X or something pre-digging your holes, then they have a target to kind of remove that turf. And we try to make our tree rings 2 meters in diameter or circumference of 1 meter, or whatever is suitable. So yes, very good question. Yes, please remove as much of the competition from the area as possible.
Thank you very much. The next question up is just a quick reminder on what is a root flare exactly?
Good question. So the root flare is where the stem tapers and the structural roots begin. So you should have a straight stem coming down and then a slight flare at the base. That is your root flare. So when you're planting, you don't want the structural roots exposed. You want them just below the soil level. So as soon as you find, when we dig down, we use like a little, looks like a little garden rake. We just use that gently to expose kind of where that root flare is. And that is good enough. So that's where we plant. So it's that widening at the base of your tree.
All right. This one, I apologize, is a little longer, but it's an extremely important question. So considering the issues with urban tree survival, which among other things can partially be attributed to severe transplant shock of large caliper and or ball and burlap stock, and we know smaller stock and whips have better survival and ability to establish and take off more quickly, how can we reduce the barrier for planting smaller stock in these landscapes? I understand some is due to vandalism concerns and such, but also seems a lot is planted with the thought bigger is better. How can we shift the mindsets, protect smaller stock, considering they are cheaper, which equals more trees in the ground, and they are more likely to survive and potentially outgrow large caliber stock? What can we do?
Wow, good job, whoever sent that baby through. That was well thought out. I like it. Okay, so that is a lot. I have a couple of thoughts. I think first we have to show that it can be done in a good way. Because time is money and trees are money and they're living things, and we don't want to install trees where we think that they don't have a good chance of survival. So I would say start with the easy spots where they are not in high traffic areas. Also tree protection. So I think there are really great systems out there that you can install temporarily to protect trees as they establish. I understand the vandalism piece for sure, as well as the fact that a lot of people want that instant gratification. But research has shown that a tree, like a ball and burlap, large caliper tree, after 5 years, they've kind of, compared to a whip or a small diameter tree, after 5 years have basically balanced out, because the bigger trees take so much time to establish a strong root system that, you know, that balance then levels out. So I do think it's through kind of showing people that it can, you know, work. That site selection, species selection, tree protection, I think is key, especially if it's going in a high traffic area. And then one other thing I will mention, because more is not always better. I think that we get caught up in the number of trees that we're planting, but you really have to look at how many resources are going to need to go into managing that many additional trees. And so always keeping a budget back for maintenance of those younger trees, it may be through things like tree protection. you need to kind of evaluate your budget and your finances. So I do think that there is definitely a place, and I do think we need to do a better job, but it's through, I guess it would be through experimentation, and doing it.
Thank you very much, Katrina. And I have one more question for you, and this is another doozy for us. So it's a big question that many people will find applicable. Do you have any recommendations or advice for urban foresters who are not well supported by their municipality? What should be prioritized?
Oh, that is a doozy. Tenacity. So what should be prioritized? First, I would look at the population of trees that you currently have and where resources are being funneled, and if they are being cared for and looked after. The second is planting. So as your urban forests age, you need to have trees kind of coming up behind them that are going to replace those individuals. I think if you're not supported, there are grants available. I know they're not, there aren't a lot, but there are grants available that can go towards things like tree planting, or take an approach like a community-based approach where you could have community members in kind of like a community-based approach to tree planting and tree care. So adopt a tree programs and things like that. So if you're not supported, and I also think that it just takes time. I've seen a lot of, I don't like to use this word, but growth in small municipalities over time as people are starting to learn more and more about the importance of urban trees. And so I think lean on people who have done it, who have been where you are as far as struggles are concerned, and see kind of what tips and tricks they used for success.
Okay, thank you. I actually lied. I have one last question. I'm going to merge these two together because they're on similar thoughts. So any thoughts that you have on the Miyawaki forest method would be greatly appreciated. And attached to that is, do you think planting groupings of trees together in a large mulched area do better than single planted trees? It seems trees like to grow together rather than as a single tree away from others.
Yes, we know this. Our forests tell us this story all of the time. So if you have a situation, and so a couple of the images that I showed you in my presentation were actually connected tree planting zones. So large areas of grass that were removed where there were a number of trees kind of planted in the same area. We are trying to build back the ecosystem. And so plants will do that together better, and they will thrive and kind of support one another. So if that is a potential opportunity, I say go for it. Even if it's a shared soil volume, go for it. Miyawaki, I am a huge proponent. I think it's a super cool idea, especially for tight urban spaces. I was listening to a podcast though that I thought was it a podcast? I don't know. But it was interviewing an arborist from around maintenance of the Miyawaki post establishment, talking about the struggles for the arborists in maintaining those trees once they mature. But I am not sure that many of the young Miyawaki forests are even there yet. But it's a good point to consider. I think it's cool that you're planting a community in a small kind of locale or location for success. I think it's really awesome.
Amazing. I'm going to hop in here as we're eating into our time now. We thank you so much for being here and for your presentation, for answering all those questions as well. It was really helpful for us as tree planters, and I feel like it's the same. There's a lot of similar emotions in the chat, I think. So we really appreciate your presentation and for you being here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.